Hello, I'm Scott Clover, and you're listening to the Intuitive Energy Podcast. This podcast series is about intuition, healing, and creating new energetic patterns that benefit you in your daily life. In my private practice, I help people heal from a diverse range of issues, including self-acceptance, trauma release, managing anxiety, emboldening self-worth, and creative expression. In today's episode, we talk about how the second and fifth chakras are intrinsically linked, why your mother's sense of self can affect how you relate to feeling safe, and how these areas have a big influence on how you relate the energies of sex, fear, and self-expression. Enjoy.
Carl Munson talking to intuitive energy healer Scott Clover. Great to be talking to you again, Scott. On this Series 2, Episode 3, we were in the chakra elevator last week, weren't we? We got in at the ground floor. Chakra 1, the roots, the community, and I think we're going up a floor to Chakra 2, is that right?
Yeah, we're going to talk about desire and fear, and desire and fear, and sex and fear.
That should keep us busy for a while then. Okay, you've got my attention.
Just to remind people from last week, we talked about the elevator goes below the first floor. So a lot of people concentrate on their first chakra up to 7. And I would say, try to get below those sub-chakras as well and go up past 7 if you want. It's quite a big building we live in. But yeah, today we're going to talk about the second chakra mostly, or how the second chakra can overreact or underperform and how that affects the chakras around it, especially the first chakra we talked about last week and the third above it.
Okay. All right. You had my attention at fear, desire, and sex. How are those 3 linked?
So the second chakra has a lot to do with those aspects of our emotional and energetic makeup. Is the sexual energy, how we deal with fear, how we deal with judgment, how we deal with being sacred to our bodies or not. So all those things are somewhat intertwined, and our society just exacerbates all of those things to how sex is portrayed even.
And this is all to do with the second chakra?
It has a lot to do with the second chakra. If the sexual energy gets distributed malignly or not distributed correctly, then you've got a xylophone that only plays 2 or 3 notes. So,
okay. Yes,
for example, the chakras, think of them as a xylophone playing do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do.
Yes. Oh, okay. You could end up a 3-note person, and no one wants to be a 3-note guy, do they? Okay,
right. But having a second chakra that is understanding of the world around it, that understands that it can have its own desires, that your choices matter, and how you feel and experience desire matters, regardless of your upbringing, regardless of what traumatic things may or may not have happened to you growing up.
Amazing. Okay, so that's the good news here, is that whilst the first and second chakras, you could say, are the inherited ideas and energies, therefore, that we have around these things, fear and desire and sex, we can rewrite those programs. And that's what this is all about, right? Rebalancing the energy.
Yeah, rebalancing the energy, allowing that whole xylophone to be utilized. Mm-hmm. Not keeping it down. Yeah, having a sexual act allow you to become a better singer. Because the second and the fifth chakras are intrinsically linked. So your throat chakra, which is communication, how we experience ourselves, putting ourselves out there in the world. The second and the fifth chakra, in my work, I see them almost always as intrinsically linked. So if someone is compromised in their second chakra, their fifth chakra is going to have to struggle more to be what would be considered a healthy energy flow. Generally, when I see one constricted, the other one is affected by that concentrated energy or that maligned energy or that stuck energy. And it can work both ways. If you can't ask what you want out of your fifth chakra in terms of sexual desire, then your sexual desire will not be seen. If you can't say to your partner, touch me this way, or I want to have sex this way, and embrace maybe a desire or a kink or a fantasy, that's that fear shutting down you being able to speak what you desire.
Oh my goodness, or oh my goddess, as I think I might have heard you say from time to time. Okay, I get this. I get this, and forgive me for, I mean, going into some personal experience. And don't worry, everybody, it won't be too personal. But the my received wisdom is from men of a certain age, the baby boomer men and I did, I'm not making a value judgment, but it didn't seem right to me as I was growing up. I thought women might be viewed or treated in a slightly different way, and that has completely affected how I have been in relationships, and even sexually. I have to say, you're bang on with that.
Correct. And a lot of it has to do with how your mother was treated. A lot of it has to do with how safe your mother felt in her body, because that's an energy that the child mimics, whether it's a male or a female. It can really cause the individual who experiences that to misunderstand their own sense of self and their own desires, whence they be judged, or how they look for affection later in life.
Yes, I can see that. You've blown my mind, not for the first time, I have to say, in our conversations here. So what's to be done about this? We can't just leave that hanging there, can we?
There are plenty of sexual happy people who had sexual maligning experiences growing up. But a lot of times that can cause contractions, or what I call kink the hoses, of the creativity and the self-expression. So this chakra, the second chakra, is also created a creativity and self-expression. Wonderful. Which is why, if you look at our society, artists are always regarded as a little on the fringes.
Oh, yes.
Right? And sometimes their sexual proclivities are heralded in like the media. They used to be.
So the Princes and the Caravaggios of this world are excellent examples, aren't they? And there they are for us to learn from, perhaps, or certainly to illustrate the point you're making here.
Right. Well, imagine if a suburban family had the sexual awareness or the sexuality of Prince. They'd be the talk of the cul-de-sac, right? They would be the talk of the cul-de-sac.
So they would.
There's nothing wrong with that. I went to college in Minneapolis, and there were plenty of stories about Prince's sexual proclivities, and they weren't demeaning. The stories I've ever heard about Prince, they weren't overly demeaning towards women.
Okay, so what we're looking at here, imbalance, or balance following imbalance. That's the conversation here. That's the work you're involved in, isn't it? Is that this does happen in our world, and there is hope that we can deal with it by balancing our energies with the help of somebody like you. And the extra value, you might say, is the connection you've made there. But sort of lo and behold, not only have I maybe become accepting of my sexuality and some of my sexual desires, suddenly I'm a more creative person as well.
Yeah, or more expressive.
Or more expressive, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
More expressive. And that's a version of creativity. Some people, I am not an artist. I can barely play hangman. But I like to support creative people. And I think creativity is what fuels our society in terms of, I like to access imagination a lot. So that's a form of my self-expression, is creativity. That's a form of expressing my creativity, is imagination. So it has to do with artistry, how you put yourself out there, what you feel comfortable saying about yourself out in the community that's going to judge you. Okay. And that's, once again, fear-based. Imagine trying out for the school play and it's a musical. Well, I mean, that's fear-inducing, just the thought of it. That's the fifth chakra. So the second chakra experiences the fear and it sends it up to the fifth chakra, and the fifth chakra constricts, and then you sing like this and you don't get the part because your voice cracks.
Okay, but often you're very generous in these conversations to give us some sort of practical insight or advice, or something people can do. Obviously, as well as booking a session with you, there are things that you often talk about that people can do for themselves as well. What might work in this particular area?
Sure. So rub your hands together. Don't do this if you're driving or operating heavy machinery. So do this if you're sitting comfortably, but rub your hands together and go ahead and put one hand on your throat and one hand on your pelvic bone, right above your genitals. And then go ahead and switch those hands and notice there might be a subtle current change, or like
It made me cough. What does that mean?
Well, instinctively, you'll use the one that you're most comfortable with.
Right.
And so when I asked you to switch them, you wouldn't instinctively choose that. So it's sort of like petting a cat backwards. We're trying to bring up some of the dander, trying to go against the grain a little bit to get some clogs out of the way. And so just have one hand on your throat and one hand on your pelvic bone, your second chakra. And just breathe for a second. And notice how the energy can go from one hand down through your body to the lower hand and then back up again. And you can do this longer at your own pace, but to go ahead and move the lower hand to the back of your tailbone. So right above your butt crack, where your butt crack starts. Mm-hmm. And notice the energy from the front of your throat cross the midline and go to the back of your body. That can dislodge a little something in our intestines, some of the fear that we hold in our intestines. And that fear we hold in our intestines definitely can be extrapolated or learned from members of our family or conditioned thinking, elders that we surround ourselves with growing up. Sometimes their fears end up in our own bodies. Take a breath. And to finish up, take the hand on the front of your throat and place it to the back of your neck. And now try to draw energy between the top hand and the bottom hand through the spine. Woo!
Woo!
Yeah.
Stimulating the Kundalini, I think is what they call it.
Yeah, or hitting that xylophone, that chakra xylophone, do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do. But as I said, imagine having a sexual experience in your second chakra and that energy flooding all the way up.
Yes.
To your seventh or eighth chakras.
Yeah.
That's more aligning. That's a more holistic experience, to use those terms.
Well, yeah, and another view on the tantric experience that is much maligned and giggled about, but that's in the same sort of ballpark, isn't it?
Sure. And I don't know how much it's maligned. I think it's more giggled about because people find it intimidating and titillating.
Yes.
And it's a lot easier to point the finger and giggle when we actually find something titillating.
Yes.
I mean, who wouldn't want to have sex for 16 hours like Sting? Right?
Indeed.
Maybe once,
right.
But you'd need a lot of electrolytes. And that's not the goal here. The goal here is to find what works for you. Yes. Find a partner that you can self-express with that's going to give back to you and think of you as well. My mentor used to call sex soul energy exchange as an acronym. Because a lot of people will have sex with anybody, anybody willing. That's not so discerning, which means you've diluted your sense of choice.
Yes.
You've given up on your sense of choice and let the sex act drive you.
And there's something else I wanted to ask you about, Scott, in that regard. Because there is a lot of sort of pop psychology about people being less inhibited. But I think there's a case to be made for the vanillas as well, who have been shamed about their lack of adventurousness, perhaps. And this is all the same, isn't it? If you're quite sort of modest in your desires, and you live in a culture that's sort of constantly prodding you to be more adventurous or more excitable or excited, you can examine, can't you, whether you're owning that completely in a healthy way. And if you are, that's great, and you can be in balance with it. Or you can see if you are actually a restricted and sort of repressed prude. This would be the same sort of investigation, wouldn't it?
Very similar. Yeah, it would be the teeter-totter. It would be the teeter-totter working to the other side of the scales, if you will.
Yeah.
So the timid are timid for a reason. And the overly sexual who intimidate the timid are overly sexual for a reason.
Yes.
I'm not judging either one of those groups.
No, me neither. I was just making a little bit of a defense of the vanilla there for a moment.
Exactly. But what I'm saying is we are animalistic beings. So sex is part of how our bodies operate, and it's part of how we stay healthy. You don't want to constrict one part of your body just because it was fearful of something that happened a long time ago. And there's ways out there now to work beyond that sense of fear. And there's ways out there to balance out your sexual energy so it compensates the other aspects of your life.
Wonderful. So let's work with it rather than against it.
Do you know the song Brand New Key?
Yes, Melanie.
Yeah, exactly. I got a brand new pair of roller skates. For some reason, that song came up in our household this morning as I was getting ready. And all of a sudden, that song just appeared, just showed up in my household. Somebody made reference to it. We played it. We looked at it and said, oh my gosh, this is the second chakra song.
How?
I mean,
How
if you
so?
look at it, you know the song, I've got a brand new pair of roller skates. You got a brand new key. So the song is called Brand New Key. And it's essentially a girl who's looking for a boy with a key, right?
Oh my God. Okay.
Which to some degree, this was banned back in the early 70s on some of the radio stations because of its sexual innuendo. Yeah. But it is a very sweet and naive song about burgeoning female sexuality. It really helps clarify that women are allowed to be sexual. Women's desires are allowed to be embraced and not mocked. Mm-hmm. And they're allowed to be coupled and shared with men's desires. Women are allowed their own desires.
Well, thank you for the societal and demographic information as well. Okay. But how does this connect? How does this connect with Melanie and the second chakra, Scott?
Oh, right. Sorry, we got really
yeah. Yes.
So this song is an example of a female's naivete, but a burgeoning sexuality that should be embraced by our society.
This song was made, 50 years ago, Scott? Yeah. I mean, obviously it's still relevant and it's still, we're still talking about it, aren't we? Things in a way probably haven't moved on that much, even though we think they might have.
Correct. They shifted a little with the Me Too movement and things like that. Women being able to speak up, their throat chakras opening up a little bit more. Whatever that whole pussy hat thing was that everyone wore the knitted hats around. These things move the bar just a little bit. They move the needle just a little bit.
Yes, because that's in society, isn't it? These are the societal movements. And a lot of the focus of our conversation is self-empowerment, isn't it? And people wanting to make this journey an adventure for themselves energetically, right? That's what we're really talking about here, isn't it? So for a woman who hears that and recognizes what you're talking about, have you got specific advice?
Yes. Stop judging.
Okay.
Stop judging yourself. Stop judging others' sexual desires, the way they express themselves, because sometimes that comes back to us like as a really hard boomerang to the head. If we judge someone else's sexual proclivities and sexual activities, then we're limiting our sense of self to some degree. So try to see where and how you judge, especially sex, and then see how that actually reflects on you.
Oh, okay. So there's a little bit of homework then. That's an interesting exercise to do, isn't it?
It's a little shadow work, actually. Is bringing your self-judgment, and where did that start? Maybe something negative happened to you in your sexual past that you haven't confronted fully.
But that is remarkable, isn't it? To examine a given, because these are personal givens, aren't they, often? And they can feel like they're absolutely, objective truth to us if they've been believed for so long and we hold them so strongly.
But that can't be discussed in the same way as some of these normalized patterns.
True.
So that's another aspect of judging. Keep your judgments self-contained and then limit them and then see how expressive you become.
What else might you suggest as a comment around the second chakra and this conversation we've been having about sex and fear?
I would say a couple things. Allow some joy in. So next time you're outside, go skipping and really concentrate where your femur hits your pelvis as you're skipping. You're hard pressed not to smile while skipping. So allow that skipping action to bring in that childhood imagination and also let it hit you in your lower pelvis. So as you're skipping, you're smiling, you're bringing your throat and face into it and bring your second chakra in and experience some joy. The other thing you can do is notice the butterfly of your pelvis, how the butterfly of your pelvis opens. It's like a wing. Sometimes it opens wide, sometimes it closes, sometimes it just the bottom of the pelvis can constrict. So you can do some thrusting exercises when you're by yourself. Hula hooping. I'm a big fan of hula hooping. Anything that can get that lower pelvis and energies moving. That would be the homework.
Well, that's quite amazing because I'd never think, we're brought up, aren't we, in terms of our understanding of anatomy and physiology with those old complete skeletons hanging in the back of a doctor's office. And obviously, the sort of ossified remains of skeletons look very hard. But what you're suggesting there is the pelvis is actually quite a flexible part of the body.
Definitely. The top of the pelvis can constrict while the bottom of the pelvis can open. If that chakra gets closed down, for example, then the tendons and those muscles constrict, and then you're going to have issues earlier or later in life. That contraction, you want to keep an eye on it and move it around if you can. So imagine like capillaries in your pelvis opening up and allowing more chi or more blood flow or more energy into your lower pelvis.
Well, that's amazing. Thank you so much. As a concluding thought there on an amazing conversation about the second chakra. Can't wait till episode 4, Scott. Thank you so much.
You've been listening to the Intuitive Energy Podcast with me, Scott Clover. Thanks to Carl Munson for the great discussion and to Corey Tutt for the music you're listening to. In my private practice, I encourage people to heal what holds you back and feel better in your body. If you need more help with that process, I'm available for healing sessions by phone internationally. Visit scottclover.com for more information. Be well, and thanks for listening. This podcast is for educational and informational purposes only, and solely as a self-help tool for your own use. I'm not providing medical, psychological, or nutrition therapy advice. You should not use this information to diagnose or treat any health problems or illnesses without consulting your own medical practitioner. Always seek the advice of your own medical practitioner and/or mental health provider about your specific health situation. For my full disclaimer, please go to scottclover.com/disclaimer.